We'll be starting up here in about a minute, once everybody logs in. Twenty seconds or so. Okay, good morning and welcome. My name is David Orr. I'm the director here with Corner Luck Roads program. We're your New York State LTAP Center. And welcome to one of our foundational webinars. Today we're talking about shop safety and PPE and trying to keep everybody safe. And I suspect Phil's going to talk a little bit about some of the issues with heat as well. So, because it is a hot day. Phil Spiezio is Washington County Senior Safety Officer, and you said 17 and a half years, Phil?
Yeah.
17 and a half years. So
unbelievable.
we don't want to forget that half. So, with that, just a couple of reminders. If you need to send us a question, open up your Q&A pod. That's how you'll get a question to us. You might want to open your chat pod up too. We can send you a note that way. Other than that, why don't we go ahead, Jody, you can go ahead and run the polls, and I'm going to go dark. And good luck, Phil.
Thanks,
All right,
David.
guys. First poll is I work for town, county, city or village, state, tribal, private, or the weekend. Answers are coming in. Give it a few more seconds. We are across the board with town, county, city, village, state, couple tribal, couple private. I don't have anyone for the weekend.
Wow.
All right, let's go to the second question. Years in current position. A lot are saying 3 to 5. We have some 11 to 20. We have about a year, less than a year. No one, though, is at less than a month. Last question is, my job is highway super, engineer, field crew, board member, none of the above. If you do put none of the above, just put that into the Q&A so we can know what your job is. And we have quite a bit of engineers, some highway supers. And all right, guys. I'm gonna hand it back over to Phil.
Awesome. Thanks, Jody. So today we're going to cover some shop safety, some DOT shop safety stuff in particular, some specifics about that, some PPE things, talk a little bit about the climate, both hot weather that we're experiencing now and then the colder weather that I'm sure will come way before we're ready for it. So Phil Spiezio, Washington County Senior Safety Officer, as David said, been doing this for quite a few years now. Worked in the private sector, heavy construction for the Fort Miller Group prior to coming over to the public sector. So let's jump into this and talk a little bit about some efficiency type things. So, looking at what we do now compared to what we used to do years ago, there's a little bit of a different tasks, different jobs, a little different climate out there, especially trying to find help and things like that. And bottom line, what we're trying to do is create a safe passageway through the state, through the town, through the county, villages, for our roads and bridges and things like that. So efficiency is something that we're always looking at, right? And you break efficiency down is you don't want to get anybody hurt. You want to do it right the first time because we don't want to do it again. And we want to be productive. So when you look at the blend of, all right, how can we be efficient? We're looking at safety, quality, and productivity. Oftentimes when we talk about safety, you can take out the word safety in the program or the policy, the procedure, and put in the word quality, and it's the same thing. It's the same framework and things like that. And if you got your safety covered, you're not getting anybody hurt to the point where they can't do the same thing they could do before. and you're doing it right the first time, meaning you're giving the service, you're building the product in which the customer is expecting, productivity kind of falls right in line. So if you take care of safety and quality, the top two, productivity comes in play, and you can take care of that. That's a real synergy there. And when you think about this now, the difference is, how many of us are actually doing more with less people? And it's probably everybody on this webinar today. We're doing more with less. So this safety, quality, productivity, the synergy of that becomes much more important. The work environment. So we're talking a little bit about shop safety and some PPE stuff. Our work environment in the field constantly changes, and you get a day like today, you have to have more breaks. You have to make sure people are staying hydrated, not just today, but leading up to today's work out there. So when you look at the work environment, we break that down into three different areas: systems, training, and culture. And most of what we look at from the work environment, as far as how we're trying to improve things, it goes to one of these, it's rooted in one of these things. A system would be how you do the work. What's the policy? What's the procedure? What's the overall program? What's the steps that you take to perform the task that you're trying to complete? The training is okay, how well do we train our people on those systems, those agreed upon systems that we're doing that work? And then the culture is overall, all right, how well do we do it, right? How well are we training our people? How good of a job do we do developing the system? And our overall culture is the blend of those two things. And we'll get into that a little bit. So team culture. One of the things I love about my job is I work with a lot of different people doing a lot of different things. So I'm learning each day. I could be with the fire departments in the morning, rescue squads, that sort of thing, over to corrections, to sheriffs, to public works, social services, things. So there's a variety of work being done by our people. When I have an opportunity to work with people and learn what they do and how well they do it and things of that nature, when you start looking at culture, you get pretty good at going into a work center or working alongside of a team, and you can get a feel 15, 20 minutes in of what level the trust is within that team. And I can't stress enough, the more you do to build trust within your team, the better everything else falls in line. And it boils down to trust, leadership, and communication. And if you have those three fundamental building blocks, if that's the foundation, if you would, of your team, of your work center, of your department, your organization, those organizations, those teams, they don't get anybody hurt. They do it right the first time, and they have a bit of fun at work. And that makes the overall efficiency of those groups much easier to obtain. And there's other things too, thank yous and appreciation type stuff. All that comes into play, but trust, leadership, and communication are those building blocks. Now we get into safety, and that's what we're talking about today a little bit. When we break safety down, it's into tasks, hazards, and control measures. And if you've done a hazard assessment, we'll get into the PPE hazard assessment in particular later on. But if you've done them, you've identified the task, that is, what are we going to do? You've identified the hazards attached to those tasks so that we make sure that we can put in good control measures. So again, it's the three-legged stool, if you would. You can see a theme here where I break things down into three quite often. But if you look at overall safety, it's what do we do? What are the hazards associated with what we do? And then what are our control measures? And it's important to identify them, and it's important to identify how well we control those hazards. Now, recruitment and retention. And this is something that we continually talk a little bit more and more about. And we go to different conferences, different trainings and things like that. And a lot of people are talking about not only recruitment, but I like to focus more on retention, right? Recruitment's important, but retention may be as important, if not more. We're doing more with less. Time is something in which we can't make time, right? All we can do is utilize time, so we have to be efficient with that. And then the difficult level of the work. It's not only the people maybe coming into the public works and the skills have changed over the years of what they come in with skills compared to what it is now. We may be doing different types of training to develop the skills that typically in the past we've been used to or become accustomed to those people already having those skills. Now we're tending to spend a bit more time making sure that they have the skills that the base skills that they need. So retention is real important. So one of the things I've been talking about, and I've been talking about this a lot in the fire service. Most of our fire departments, actually all of them in Washington County, there's a couple area paid ones outside of Washington County, but they're all volunteer. And you come up with this, again, 3 steps or 3 areas of employee and team performance. And first and foremost, you have to have the time to get what it is you're trying to get done, right? So you have to isolate that time, bracket that time out on what we're going to spend doing the work. You got to blend in the interest, right? So part of your team, they don't all have the same interests. So it's really good to take a look at the interests that each individual have and try to blend that and use that for your overall performance. And in the aptitude, right? The aptitude, the ability to be able to do that type of work, how naturally does it come to people? And when you start looking at this, the time basis, the interest, and the aptitude of people, you can really start to build some personal performance, which leads over into some team performance. And I find that people, you given the time, and the people that have the interest in things, right, and you develop that aptitude, whatever that is, and kind of build off that, it gives them the confidence that they need to actually feel part of making something different, making something bigger. And if you can blend that in with your team, the performance starts to take off a little bit. So consider that when you're looking at training and things like that, not all of your team members are the same. They don't know how they have the same interests, and they certainly don't all have the same aptitude, right? Some people are born operating, a front end loader or a heavy piece of equipment or a crane, but not everybody is. So if you take the time, when you have the time to train people, especially those that may not have the aptitude that you're looking for, train when the time is there, try to spend some time training them to build confidence. Because if somebody has confidence in doing, they feel like they contribute, that is where they perform really well. So spend the time and understand that time, interest, and aptitude. So going back to the hazard control a little bit, just a reminder, when we look at hazard controls, don't automatically jump to that PPE section that we'll cover. Talk about, hey, do we really have to do it? Can we substitute something else, like a lesser hazardous chemical? An engineering control is isolating the hazard from us, right? That's a really good way of doing it. I use the example sometimes of the box fan. I guess it's it's the weather in which we're probably running some box fans different places. Well, they have a grid or a guard or a grill covering those rotating fins on that box fan, right? And it's a much better control measure to make sure that grill or the guard is in place, doesn't have any holes in it, that sort of thing, than it is to say, hey, Phil, when the box fan's, on and those fins are rotating, don't put your finger in that because it's going to hurt you, type thing. Because eventually, if we leave it up to Phil, eventually he's going to put his fingers in the rotating fins, right? So that engineering control is a really good method. We get below the hashes there, the backslashes, we start to get into areas in which, it relies on us to keep us safe. So when we look at safe work practices, training, and personal protective equipment, yeah, they're all good control measures, but just remember that they rely on us as far as keeping us safe. And, if we do that, I'm sure we've had some people on the webinar today that may have used an upside down 5-gallon bucket or a chair, or maybe even a rotating bar stool to reach something from a tool standpoint, or maybe even changing a light bulb at home, right? We know that that's not the right thing to do. It's not the best control measure, but we end up doing it, right? That's part of human nature. So a little pet peeve of mine is the upside down 5-gallon bucket. So much so that when I go to shops, sometimes if they know I'm coming, they'll actually put a little dirt on the top of the upside 5-gallon bucket and put it somewhere and put a footprint on it and wait for me to lose my mind. But anyway, we have to think things through and we have to help each other so that we minimize the risk, right? Because there's risk in everything we do. It's a matter of how do we minimize that risk so that we have a better chance to go home, because we all work, right, to give us the ability to do some things that we like to do outside of work. And if we get hurt at work, it doesn't line up, right? That's not something that we want to do. So culture, we talked a little bit earlier about systems, training, and culture on a slide previous. So I want to just blend in a little bit more of that culture thing. So, build great systems and develop good people. And if those teams, those work centers that have really good systems, the people that actually do the work were part of building the systems, and we develop people to follow those systems, right? We don't just say it, we don't just train people on it, and then in the real world do something different. But if we actually build the system, we spend time saying, hey, this will work, and then we develop our people to follow that system, the culture really starts to get much better at work, because we understand the expectations, we understand the consequences. We're not all perfect, right? We do make mistakes, but we all agree that, hey, we have a good system, right? Let's follow the system and train our people to follow those systems, and then not just say we're going to do it, but actually perform the work that way. So here's an example of a system I found about a week and a half ago or so in one of our DPW shops. So another one of I mentioned earlier, a pet peeve of mine was the upside down 5-gallon bucket. But another one is when we lean stuff against the wall. And it's not perfect. When you start to look at this, I think we have some engineers on and some experienced superintendents and things like that. It's not perfect, right? The steel's on top of each other and you still got to be careful. But if you notice that this stand does allow us to have some inventory of flat steel, and it's not leaning up against the wall. So often I go into different DPW shops or other types of shops, and we have stuff leaning, whether there's signposts, whether there's flat steel, whether it's rebar, whatever, anything leaning up against the wall. If you go and you try to pull something out, right, the risk is something else falling and striking you either in the hand or the head or arm or shoulder or something else. And now we have a lost time, workplace incident that we could have prevented. So this is an example of a system that was developed, and there's others that we do, but look at the workplace and say, okay, how do we design it for safety in mind? And look at those engineering controls and look at that process much, and look at those things before you start jumping to the PPE or the training, the programs, the policies. Put those systems in place, and then they'll be there. Eliminates the need, in this case, for leaning flat stock steel up against the wall. So let's talk a little bit about training, right? So that was the systems. We're talking a little bit about training, and there's a lot of different varieties of training. And we do a new employee orientation, and we generally go over a lot of stuff, right? And when we have orientation, we have all kinds of people coming in different occupations to the county. So we have an overall new employee orientation, which may be similar to those folks on the webinar today. So with that orientation, you're sharing a lot of information, and you have sheriffs, you have corrections, you have public health, social services, you have all different types. Now, generally, we keep afterwards, we keep the DPW folks, the sewer district folks, and we'll go over some of the more common safety principles. But in no way does that new employee that just leaves new employee orientation is safe to go out and, let me just say, direct traffic or, even work in a work zone. without having some sort of a shadow or some sort of a mentor working with that person. So we have a wide varieties of different types of ways of training people. You have a new system, there should be a training for that new system or that new operation. A new project or something that's a little bit different from a task specific standpoint, will require some sort of training. The annual refresher these days, we're talking about sexual harassment, we're talking about workplace violence, has right to know or emergency action planning type stuff, the fire extinguisher, things of that. That annual refresher training is something that's important, and try to mix that up a bit because, you have a lot of people coming back repeatedly for that refresher training. So try to change it up a little bit. On the job training, you have to make sure that you have people watching other people and mentoring them, job shadowing, and having that ability to review what they are that they're doing to make sure that they're utilizing the systems that we train those people on. A big thing with that on job is using, identifying and using one of your senior people and helping you utilize them to help do that sort of training. That builds in a lot of trust in the work environment. And if you have the trust, it's much easier to talk to people and say, hey, wait a minute, why are you doing that? Think about your kids, think about your wife, think about your family. They want you and they expect you to be home for dinner. So, why give more risk to something than what it's deserving? And that's really what we're trying to do here is train people so they can identify the systems and reduce the amount of risk that they're being exposed to while we're working, while we're performing the jobs. We also do things like, in addition to the annual refresher, we do, something called the DPW safety days. And that's where this picture comes from here, is we utilize a fairgrounds and develop a training program very much like a school, in which we set up, it's usually 6 classes, and I usually set up 6 different groups, and they rotate through these classes just like a school would, like your normal school day. So it gets people up and moving, and we do a barbecue and things like that. So it puts a nice positive twist into safety, and it gets people so that they're taking a look at different topics and maybe can bring things back. So it's something that's worked well for us for quite a few years now. Let's talk about building and grounds. So we got on today, we're talking about the shop safety, the yard safety, that sort of thing, our grounds. We'll get into some PPE in a little bit, and then we'll summarize. So building and grounds. So here's a new facility. It's actually still being built in southern part of Washington County, and it looks great. The amount of room that we have, you can see the salt building. You can see the ramp leading up to salt screen type thing. You see everything laid out, lots of space, right? This is actually a drive-through facility. So in the rear of the building, we have the overhead doors as well. So there's a wash bay, a maintenance type bay, that sort of thing. So huge improvement compared to the building that we had here before. We don't have the luxury of working with these buildings or having these buildings, but I do see a number of new buildings being built around the state. So this is what we're striving for, something that gives us plenty of room. Building and ground inspections, right? Something that should be done on some sort of a basis. Now, this time of year, a lot of us aren't in the buildings much, right? We're out on the job sites, on the project sites, things like that. Sometimes people from different buildings are going, getting materials and resources at the building. So, it's more important to take a look at your building and being sure that you inspect it, right? You may not have to do this, weekly, certainly possibly not daily, but monthly. It's a good idea to have somebody and take turns within your work team of having people take a look at the building and inspecting things or looking for things that might be safety or health related. When you start working in the building and over time, right, it's like having a sign. You see the sign initially when it was first set up, But then over time it becomes part of the, just the overall environment, and you don't see it. So it's good to take some time once in a while, look at your work environment, your buildings, your grounds, things like that, and look for actual safety hazards, because sometimes we just overlook them when you're going throughout the day. So I'm a big fan of doing that. And hey, if you circle no or you underline no on something like this, get a hold of somebody who can do something about it, right? So that we can get it fixed and you don't continually, fill out this sheet and have the same problem every month, because then that system doesn't work. So if you develop a system of doing inspections, be sure on that other end you have a system in place, so that you can timely take a look and troubleshoot and remove or isolate those hazards from the work environment. So a little bit about the buildings, right? They're all come in different styles. The one on the upper right corner there, it's a relatively new building. That's in good repair. You've got some room to get in and out of the building, that sort of thing. Not that there's not safety concerns there. You have to take a look at that. One of the things that have always bothered me about our DPW buildings is that threshold, with the overhead door and backing equipment in, or even driving it out these days. We really have to be careful when you're passing through the threshold of that door. Make sure people are paying attention, make sure people are aware you're pulling the equipment out, using a spotter, whenever possible when you're backing the equipment back in. And you take a look at that one in the bottom towards the left-hand side of the slide, right? An older building, masonry, doors are relatively small and narrow. We don't have bollards, probably not a way of guiding things in. So you have to be a bit more careful, power lines and things like that there. So, and then we have one in between in the upper left-hand corner of the building. Lots of overhead doors, but also lots of stuff around in the yard and things like that. So consider the layout of the building, consider the engineering and what you're doing. So a little bit about building construction, the roof, the walls and the floor, right, are there. The newer buildings, constructed with steel for the most part, in some sort of concrete block foundation of sorts, but they're mainly built with steel and they're sprinklered and, lots more room for the equipment, right? The equipment doesn't seem to get any smaller, it just keeps getting bigger. And then the infrastructure, electrical, pneumatic, plumbing, including, your sewer systems and your drains for your floor and things like that, right? Come a long ways, from what they used to be, where there was some sort of a ditch that was leading out of the garage where, all of our runoff was going and stuff. So capturing that and improving our environment around their buildings, right? Not being careful about dumping waste and things. So, but when you look at the building, think of that type of the construction and in the electrical and things like that. Oftentimes from an electrical standpoint, especially the older buildings, we don't have enough outlets to power up all of the things we're trying to power up now. Be careful of those multi-strips, right? You don't plug a multi-strip into a multi-strip. You start to run the real potential of overloading a circuit. And, two major reasons for having fires in our shops are, is the equipment and not isolating maybe battery power or having something else wrong with the equipment. Or electrical. So it's something to keep an eye on, in our building. So exits and means of egress, right? Real important to take a look at this. This is actually a means of egress, and you can see they try painting the board orange so that people wouldn't trip over it, right? But that's probably not the best control measure. Why do we have something there? What do we do when we built, an add-on piece or an entry area, that sort of thing? Fire extinguishers near the exits, right? That's typically what we're looking for, is properly sized fire extinguishers. And typically you'll find them near each exit door, exit passageway. It's a good place to put them. Clean and organized, right? Break rooms, right? Lots of our break rooms are still inside the building where we're running our trucks and equipment and, maybe even doing some torching or welding. We really should have a clean work environment or clean break, area where we can go to eat and spend a little bit of time on break. our offices and bathrooms and things like that are changing. It's amazing to see we're building two different new buildings now, one in towards the northern part, center to northern part of the county, and one in the southern part of the county. It's amazing to see the difference between the new buildings and some of our older buildings. Certainly, I think if you get something clean and organized, it's much easier to keep it that way. Here are some pictures of the shop, right? And how things can get, a little bit messy in a hurry. There's a reason for, storing things properly and things like that. So some examples of what's in our work center and how we can plan out the work center so that it's as clean and organized and have enough space is key to shop safety. The more organized and the more space that you have, the more safer the work environment typically is. Having a rhyme or reason for where you're storing things. Certainly anything flammable you'll want in some flammable storage cabinets and things like that. A little bit about the grounds, right? We're looking at storage facilities for sand and or salt, where we've got usually some sort of bulk storage facilities. And then the overall grounds around the building and things like that. So this is actually some pictures from on the bottom from the building that we just replaced down in the southern part of the county. Think about our stockpiles, right? And how we're getting up on those stockpiles and safe access. For those of you that do MSHA, have a mine or, gravel bed pit type thing, which falls under the MSHA, make sure your berms are intact and at least higher than half the height of the tallest wheel that you have, things like that, and keep them maintained, right? Make sure your any scaffolds you have, any stairwells, things of that nature that are clean and organized, or properly manufactured. So your top rail should be around 42 inches, your mid rail should be 21, and if you got people working underneath the scaffold system, you need to have some sort of toe board, 4-inch toe board. So DPW shop safety, slip, trips, and falls. That's our number one reason for injury here in Washington County every year. It was last year. It will be this year and again next year. Think about fire and fire safety. One of the things here, we're not going to go over, all the fire extinguisher use and things like that today, but be sure people are trained in the use of fire. But the main thing here is calling 911 early on. As soon as you smell smoke, something, it smells funny, you got a gas smell, whatever, electrical type of arc or something, call 911 as soon as you possibly can. And we can replace the equipment, we can replace the buildings, we can't replace you. You don't have, firefighter gear on. So make sure you always call 911. You'd only use a fire extinguisher in very, very small incipient fires, or if you possibly, your exit's blocked and you can't get out. Other than that, they stay on the wall, call 911, get to your accountability area. We work with different types of chemicals. Make sure that, we have SDSs on file, right? They used to be called the MSDSs, rigging and lifting, right? Never be under or have any part of your body under some sort of lifted load. Personal protection, we'll talk a little bit about that. Vehicle and equipment, tools, adequate space, and structurally sound, right? Those are some things that we're looking at from a shop safety standpoint. Here's an example. This is a newer building, a nice stairwell leading up to a mezzanine area where we're storing some supplies and things like that. Not all of us have the luxury of having a building such as this, but it's clean and organized. The steps, there's nothing on the steps, right? You don't want to store things on stairs, whether you're at the office, shop environment, or your home. Try not to store stuff on the stairs. Not a good place. Guardrails, good condition, right? No sharp edges. Continuous movement along the steps. Ladders, good repair. Fall protection, prevention, properly used. Adequate lighting. That's something that we don't always think about. Make sure that our shops provide there's enough lighting in our shops to do what it is, the task we're being asked to perform. Proper access, right, to the different controls and the tools and things like that. You don't want to set up your shop so that your workbench is out and somebody has to use the upside down 5-gallon bucket to reach the wrench that's hanging on the board behind it. So inspected and charged for your extinguishers, right? Here's a sign. Nymer gave these signs out before you leave. Make sure all master switches are in the off position. And that's cutting off most of the power from the battery to your equipment. Generally, unfortunately, doesn't take all of the power away. Usually there's some things like the salt spreaders, something like that may have power up from a program standpoint. So flammable combustible materials stored properly, keep our exits and our means of egress clear, and make sure that you can see them. Shop clean and organized, right? Free of trash and waste buildup. It only takes a minute to keep things cleaned up. And once you get them clean and organized, I find that it's much easier to maintain them that way. Newer building, you've got some fire alarm systems, right? Make sure they're inspected and good working order, and all vehicle master switches in the off position. So fires are real danger in our shops. We have to make sure that we do everything we can. Electrical safety, right? A lot of us struggle from electrical safety and having enough outlets and things like that. So we don't run temporary wiring as permanent, and that means running a lead cord up and over, some steel structures or around corners when we could have run something in a conduit or a more permanent electrical installation. No extension cords through walls, doors, or windows. Every once in a while, I still see, something going through a window with the window closed on the lead cord, or a hole cut in the siding and, or underneath where it rotted out, and running a lead cord out to, something in the yard. So be careful. No extension cords through walls, doors, or windows. Electrical panels, breakers, disconnects labeled and accessible. So you don't want to be storing supplies in front of electrical panels or fire extinguishers or anything like that. Lead cords are the right size, not cut, frayed, or broken. Right, same thing with airlines, right? I saw an airline the other day in one of our shops, and it had some tape on it, right? So it was spliced and then covered up with some tape. Be careful about that sort of thing. Electrical, the same type of thing. Put the right plug on it. Cut it if it needs to be shorter, right? If you do take electrical lead cords and take them out of service, make sure you're cutting off the male end, right? The male end's got to be cut off, not the female end. All panels, junction boxes, things of that nature, receptacles are covered in good repair. One of the things here, especially the older shops, you may have taken a breaker out. Make sure you put that plate in there to cover that breaker if you're taking anything out. So there's no holes or anything like that that's allowed in our electrical boxes. Lots of times we rewire something, we put some new circuit in, and we leave the old circuit there, hopefully not powered up, but wires exposed and things like that. So if you're adding stuff, replacing stuff, make sure you take the older stuff out that aren't used anymore. And then I mentioned earlier, no multi-strips into multi-strips. But many of us, I think, struggle with this sort of thing. It's different, plugging in a charger unit for maybe a cell phone or power to a computer, a lot different than powering up, a coffee maker or a microwave or toaster or something like that. When you start using those multi-strips, you start using a lot of power in a hurry. Chemical safety, SDSs, right, on file and available for all chemicals. One of the things of the SDSs, you have to make sure people know how to find them, what they're called. If you're calling them something different, make sure that you have cross-reference in your table of contents for those chemicals. But the goal here is to be able to read, identify, understand the hazards before your employees, before your team members are working with those sort of chemicals. That's important. But also if you happen to be exposed to something, make sure afterwards you can get a hold of those SDSs. And it's a great idea if you do have an unfortunate, prevention measures fail, somebody's exposed to a chemical, to get that SDS, give it to that person. So when they go seek medical attention, the doctors, the medical care professionals know what it is that they're exposed to. It helps them treat them better. So it's really important. This is one of the oldest standards, the HAZCOM right to know standard, but it's also still one of the most cited ones. And we all have different chemicals. Some of us have more than others, but I would not take or maintain a supply of any sort of chemical without making sure that you have the SDS on file and you looked at the hazards and said, okay, we can work safely with this type of chemical. Police should understand the hazards of those chemicals. And then secondary containers, and I see this once in a while, right? No food or beverage container can be used for a secondary container of a chemical. So you can't use that 2-liter bottle of soda and put, antifreeze or a windshield wiper or something else in it. So only proper containers, and make sure that container is suitable for what it is you're putting it in. Because if you put a chemical in a container and it's not suitable and it disintegrates, now you have the chemical all over the place, whatever that may be, the product. So rigging and lifting equipment, right? We do tend to rig. We do tend to secure, equipment on trailers and things like that. So, think about that a little bit. Make sure that you have them properly secured to the trailer. Make sure if you're lifting anything, you've checked the slings, right? They're all tagged, whether it's a wire rope, whether it's a chain, or whether it's a strap. They all have tags on them with the weight limitations and things like that. And if they're, you've got, deformities in any way, the hooks pulled out, you gotta replace them. Those straps, if you're starting to see, certainly if you see the red, you have to take it out of service. But even before that, if you start showing some wear on your straps, you should really replace that. Yeah, inspections, right? Make sure you have billing inspections. If you're doing that monthly when you're checking them, the cranes, the lifts, that sort of thing, they have to be inspected by somebody from the outside once a year. So make sure you're going through and doing a good inspection on any rigging, lifting equipment type thing. Personal protection, we got the eye wash stations, you got dark guards and tools for equipment, right? Lots of times I'm seeing grinders and things like that, especially the angle grinders without the guards on them. So do what you can, keep those guards on, that sort of thing, wearing your PPE, right? Make sure that your tools and equipment are good repair. Body mechanics, I look at that a lot. Make sure that you're using your legs and you're in an athletic position, things of that nature. As you get older, like I am, that becomes more and more important to make sure that you're ready to do whatever it is you're asking your body to do. Lockout, tag out, hazardous energy control. You think about those loaders, you think about our dump trucks, things like that. Make sure that you're doing everything you can to control whatever energy it is. Maybe it's gravity, maybe it's electrical, maybe it's air, hydraulic, things of that nature. Make sure you're watching out for your pinch points and things like that. A little bit about first aid supplies, right? You should have plenty of first aid supplies for your shop, that sort of thing. Lately we're working on getting some things like, I don't know if you can see me pretty well, but the Stop the Bleed kit is really important. Probably if you're going to save somebody's life from a protection mode, right? Our prevention measures fail and we unfortunately have some sort of an incident. I can't stress enough to have a kit similar to this, a Stop the Bleed kit, where you've got some bandages in there that work towards clotting, and you have a tourniquet and some other things like that. Because if we're going to save somebody's life, more than likely it's because we're going to be stopping some bleeding, and these definitely do save lives. So consider thinking about Stop the Bleed kit, things like that. And there's a couple different types. You can get them in the superintendent can keep them in the truck, or you can get them in the job site, or you can keep them into buildings. But it's a good thing to have something like a Stop the Bleed kit. strongly encourage you to add that as part of your first aid supplies. And more of the prices, hopefully you can see this a little bit, but this is an AED, automatic external defibrillator. They've come down in price these days. And it's something to consider. I think, for $1,300-$1,400, you can have an AED in your shop. So it's something to consider as well. Provide the training, make sure you do the inspections at least monthly to make sure they're in working order. So if you do have an AED, I strongly encourage you to make sure that you have people checking them to make sure they're in service. So,
Bill,
yeah.
we do have a statement from one of the participants that says heavy machinery, plows, loaders, sweepers pose risks of crash injuries.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point, Jody. And talking about that and backing equipment in, moving equipment, whether, we can, certainly at the job site, this is an issue and be seen and use spotters and things like that. But from a heavy equipment standpoint, everything is hard, everything is heavy, and lots of things are sharp. So from a forgiving standpoint, the equipment knows one thing, and that is what the operator is telling it to do. So whatever you can do, especially inside the buildings, when you're putting plows on, you're taking plows off, there's a system where you follow that system and make sure that you know where everybody is and make sure people are trained to follow that system. So it's a good point. The equipment we have out there is heavy, it's hard, it's sharp, and it's not forgiving. It's something in which if you're caught in the wrong place, it doesn't have feelings. No matter how much we operate this heavy equipment, it doesn't have feelings for us. It knows one thing, and that's how to do what it is you're telling it to do. So good point. Thanks, Jody. So not a question in that, just a reminder that we have some very heavy equipment out there that we have to be very careful with. The blind spots, especially on those type of things. We do lots of, I call them safety pins, but toolbox talks. And, they're 10 minutes or so, sign-in sheet on the back, a little bit of safety information on the front. And those are good things to remind people about that equipment, especially the rear end swing. You're at a job site, you're digging, replacing a cross culvert, and you've got that rear end swing of that excavator. You got to really be careful of that. Front end loaders, blind spots all over the place. So PPE, we'll talk a little bit about PPE, when it's necessary, what kind is necessary, right? How to adjust. This is the last control measure. I'm not saying it's not important, but it's the last control measure when we start looking at that hazardous energy control standpoint. So we talked earlier about safety and safety being task, hazard, and control measures. From a PPE hazard standpoint, we add in that personal protection equipment, where that's the last measure of defense, if you would. Still important. I'm not sure that safety helmet that he has on, the safety hat, would be ANSI approved for head protection, but it was an interesting picture nonetheless to throw in here. So types of hazards. So these are the type of hazards. Not sure, I may have missed one or two. I was trying to be as all inclusive, but not have the slide too busy. Struck by or caught between. So what Jody mentioned from someone in our webinar group, throwing out that statement, which is a great one. Struck by, caught between our equipment and the machinery. Be careful about that. Don't be caught between something when the machinery is operating and have no place to go. Falls are another one, flying debris, right? We're cutting concrete, we're torching, that sort of thing. We have flying debris. Noise is something, right? We have to make sure if you know anybody that has a difficulty in hearing, right? And you have to change how loud you're talking. Noise is certainly something to make sure that you're protecting your hearing. Cuts and lacerations, right? Vibration. We don't think about this, but from the public works world, we are exposed to some vibrations, right? We're tamping something in which we just did a cross culvert and we're trying to tamp it so that the traffic can travel safely again on it, right? Dust, certainly that's an issue, right? Whether it's generated from concrete, cement, sandstone, whatever it may be, right? We don't want to be breathing that stuff in. So at least an N95 when you're exposed to dust, and then, monitor it if you need something more than that. Temperature, right? Today's very hot out there. More breaks, shade, provide shade, maybe tents, for certainly trees, utilize them. Plenty of water. Now, you can't play catch up when it comes to heat illnesses, whether it's stroke or something else, but you want to make sure that you're hydrating well ahead of time. So hydration starts and continues a few days ahead of time. So try to keep that water flowing. Light, right? Light is a type of hazard, whether it's, from welding, from torching, or from sunlight, that sort of thing. Protect yourself, right, with sunscreen, things like that out there. Some tick spray, things of that nature to keep the ticks. They're pretty prevalent these days. Something, weight is something, and certainly fire. So those are some types of hazards that we're exposed to when you start doing the PP hazard assessment. Specifically, our body parts, our head to our foot, and everything in between. So you can see here, we're getting ready to do some chainsaw work. So he's pretty well protected. So that's the type of protection, right? Hard helmet, safety glasses, goggles, shields, hearing protection of some sort, right? You can do dual hear protection when you need to, dust masks, maybe even upgrading to respirators. High visibility clothing, right? That doesn't protect us necessarily from getting hurt, but at least gives us some visibility. One of the, two areas I'm really concerned about is that threshold, that backing and working around equipment, getting caught between or struck by, right? And that goes into our work zones, right? Into our flaggers and our other people in our work zone, right? So be very careful when you're setting up work zones and things like that. That's a topic for another day. We're talking a bit more about shop and PPE, but make sure that you can be seen out there and make sure you have an out at your job sites. Protective footwear, gloves, and some sort of electrical protection is important to have. If you want to look at the OSHA regs, right, these are the subparts of it. In construction, 1926, that's where you're in the field. And then at the shop, you're covered under the 1910. Any questions with any of that or any help? If anybody's on the webinar wants to reach out, I'd be more than happy to help with any of that, to make sure. If you haven't done a PPE hazard assessment, I'd strongly encourage you to do this. These are supposed to be reviewed at least on an annual basis, or when you change any sort of jobs and things like that. So follow the hierarchy of hazard control, right? First, that's elimination or substitution, engineering controls. Then we get into safe work practices or procedures, some training, and then finally, right, last but not least, is that PPE hazard assessment. So, and then we break it down. Here we got the project, the overall project. All right, what's the jobs within that project? Okay, what are the tasks within the jobs? What are those hazards now? What are those hazard controls? And then PPE. So you can kind of see the way it is. The more you can break the job down into this specific, the easier it is to see, okay, what exactly do we need, right? And one of the big things here with PPE is we have to help each other. We have to remind each other, because especially on a day like today, when it's pretty hot out there, you're in the sun, things can get a little bit lax. But remember that PPE, when you did your hazard assessment, there was a reason for it. So one of the things I think a lot about is how can we influence others, right, to maintain that base level of safety. And when you have that trust in the work environment, it's much easier to talk about somebody and say, hey, Phil, put your helmet on, or Phil, where's your safety glasses or whatever. We were pouring a bridge yesterday, and, eye protection, head protection, protection from the concrete, things of that nature. Really, really important to remind each other that, hey, wait a minute, you don't have your safety glasses on, put them on, or goggles, or that sort of thing. And this little statement on a hard helmet of mine years ago makes a lot of impression on me. When I think a little bit about safety, right? I've had to, learn something. I've had to earn the right to speak about something. But in the end, really, it doesn't matter what I know. It matters on, how much I influence other people. Yes, I have to earn the right and understand what it is I'm talking about. But in the end, it doesn't really matter how much I know. It's how much I have the ability to affect other people. And that's really important for the superintendents and, everybody on here is remember, you have to have the ability to make sure that you've got the job hazard assessment and you're actually asking people to follow that sort of thing. So a little practice PPE, think about what the job is you're doing, right? Think about that. Think about the different hazards associated with the job, break the hazards, task down into hazards, and then the PPE required to do that. So from a PPE inventory level, you want to make sure that you have enough PPE sized appropriately to cover your respective teams, right? To understand what they need, make sure that you're keeping it up to date, they're comfortable, that people are using them and things like that. So it's a really good method to keep the PPE organized, keep a level of PPE in which you know that you've got time to replenish that before you run out of the sizes and types and things like that. So from a shop safety standpoint, clean, organized, well planned out work areas, right? This covers your buildings, your grounds, your shops, things like that. Have a rhyme or reason for how you organize things, how you're sharing things of that nature. From a PPE standpoint, make sure you've done your proper hazard assessments. Make sure you have good hazard controls along with the use of the quality of the PPE usage, right? Make sure that, you're making it so that, people like wearing this stuff, that it's comfortable. You've got the right PPE being utilized for the job, things like that. So when you look at shop safety, you look at PPE, right? You even look a little bit at the project sites that we work on, right? When you look at, a day like today from a climate control standpoint and helping each other keep people safe, right? That sort of thing. Build great systems and develop good people with a foundation of, some sort of solid trust, right? I can't stress enough of having the fundamental building blocks of trust, some leadership and communication, because it really helps when we talked earlier about efficiency and how that, none of us are doing less with more people, right? We're not doing less with more people. We're continually doing more with less people. So this becomes more and more important that, we're looking for a work environment where people can be treated with dignity and respect, fairly and consistently, and giving them an opportunity to increase aptitude in areas that they may not have the aptitude, right? They're given an opportunity to train on systems that we spent some time developing with those people doing the work. So, right, systems, training, and culture with a foundation, a cultural environment based on trust, leadership, and communication. That is so much more important, because when I'm out working with people, it's not that they don't know the control measures. It's not that they don't know the risk of what it is they're being asked to do. It's thinking that, hey, you know what, people care about me. It's the overall culture is that what we do, what we say we're going to do, we actually do it. And all of this sort of thing, right? All of these measures and things like that, our number one goal is that everybody that came to work today goes home at the end of today. And that's the most important thing when we're talking about shop safety. We're talking about building safety, ground safety. We're talking about PPE. We're talking about anything that we've got coming up next week. Our goal is to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to go home whole every day. So when they put their safety shoes on in the morning, they're going to take them off at nighttime. And unfortunately, I've been called to different workplaces or responded as part of the fire department, the EMT stuff, and have seen situations in which the control measures weren't effective. They didn't work that day. And unfortunately, we had somebody, a dad, a husband, a brother, a family member, a friend, co-worker, not have the opportunity to go home whole and have dinner as a family. And that's really what it's about. It's about getting some work done, feeling good about what it is you're doing, but ensuring that your team, your department, your organization, that everyone has the opportunity to go home whole every day.
Bill,
Yeah,
we do have a statement that says many workers lack or don't use hearing protection regularly. Check your fellow workers for hearing protection. Employers consider baseline hearing testing to set the benchmark. Know your high decibel work locations.
yep, and that's part of, thanks, Jody. That's part of measuring your work center, understanding that dB level of the people in that area and what they're being exposed to. And whether you're running machinery, equipment, a jackhammer, a lawnmower, a chainsaw, you have to have those dB levels measured. And there's actually an app you can get on the phone. I wouldn't use that for your specific measurements, but if you have that app on the phone, you can actually measure the dB to a certain degree, certain accuracy while you're doing that sort of work. So you have a baseline. But that's important, and that's in the OSHA regulations, and you have to have a hearing conservation program. That's part of that whole system. And hearing protection is part of that system. And how do you prevent that? So another good comment. That's great. Is there any other questions, Jody? Or any other statements or
Nope, that
comment?
was the only one I had.
Great, great. I see David's back on here.
Just gonna say goodbye to everybody and see if there's anything else folks had questions on. Last chance from them.
Hmm.
Okay, well, if not, folks, we'll see you next week on one of our foundational webinars. I think it's Complete Streets next week in ADA, if I remember correctly.
That you do.
There we go.
Mhm.
And we got a whole series of them up until the first week of September. So thanks, Phil.
Great. Thanks, David.
Stay cool this week.
Yeah,
Well, next 2 days.
enjoy the rest of the summer.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.